Good afternoon. My name is Charles Jennings. I'm director of the Christian Reagan-Hart Center for Emergency Response Studies here at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I want to thank you for attending this, our first event of the fall 2023 semester. And it's a very timely presentation on the Buffalo, New York blizzard of Christmas week 2022, which killed 31 residents and paralyzed the city for a week. Following the event, the city of Buffalo contacted New York University and commissioned an after action report. And we're very pleased to have two authors of that report with us today. The first is well known to our attendees, Ray Zimmerman, who's now a research professor, a professor emeritus of planning and public administration at New York University's Wagner School of Public Service. She has actually got a record now. This is her third time presenting at a Reagan-Hart event. The previous two times were related to her work on transportation interdependencies in disaster, and she collaborated with the Reagan-Hart Center in work sponsored by the Transportation Research Board on pipeline emergency response. So we're pleased to have Ray back. She is joined by her co-presenter, Professor Khan Osbey, who is at NYU's Tandon School of Engineering and Center for Urban Science and Progress. Professor Osbey's got a very extensive record of publication and research in transportation, big data, sensors, and simulation. And they were both brought on to assist with the after action report for the city of Buffalo. So with that, I will turn it over to Professor Zimmerman to talk about, the parties that were involved in supporting the effort and lead us into our presentation.
For the research. And Erin Caval. So a very wide-ranging set of participants, and we were assisted by others, Dr. Carlos Restrepo, Dr. Zilin Vian, who's a postdoctoral fellow at Khan C2 Smart Center. And we want to thank Dr. Sherry Gleed, who's the dean of the NYU Wagner School, and a whole host of others who gave us access to information. Juliet Kayyem from Harvard, Ken Kajawa from National Grid, Mark Meyerhofer from Charter Communication, the New York City Emergency Management Group, Deirdre Quain from the city of Buffalo, James Rudin, Aligned Climate Capital, and Andrew Stober from Waze. I know that's a mouthful. They are all listed in the report. Basically, what I want to go through quickly before handing it over to Khan, and then I come back with electric power, is to just quickly review some of the issues, Buffalo's history of blizzards, and the focus then on transportation and electric power, even though the report itself covers a lot of other things like business continuity and communication. Then we move into transportation, electric power, and lessons learned and future directions. And why this particular storm was so bad was that Buffalo has had a tremendous history of storms being on Lake Erie. And you see in the corner the National Weather Service's map of that. And then in 77 and 85, they had record blizzards prior to the December 2022 event. But then 2022 was reported for Buffalo as the third snowiest December on record. Even though November started out fairly warm prior to the big blizzard, snow events began in late November through mid-December, even before the 23rd to the 26th blizzard. And here you can see again up close the National Weather Service archive on for the period from December 23rd to the 27th. And you see the dark colored bullseye, which gives the inches of snowfall. And what was the main problem here was that the response and rescue was impeded by 80-mile-an-hour winds, wind chill, duration of the storm lasting 37 hours. The storm's timing over a Christmas holiday, which impacted obviously the availability of emergency staff, and the assets weren't always designed to withstand a storm of this magnitude. And there were some unique aspects. First of all, the size of the population. Buffalo ranks second in New York State in terms of size of the population, and human behavior. People were out driving in the snowstorm, even though there were warnings, and even if they had heard them, they would ignore them. There were serious equity issues. About a third of Buffalo's population and about 14% of Erie County's population is Black, and about a quarter of Buffalo's residents live in poverty. There are food deserts defined by the Department of Agriculture as the distance of people from food stores, and they occurred also underscoring the sparsity of essential resources. And finally, the deaths that occurred, 31 in the city, 46 in the county, were disproportionately felt among Black residents. 2/3 of those who died in the city and over half of those in the county who died were Black. And there's a very detailed chronology of events in the report, but you can see that there were forecasts prior to the 23rd. And then the blizzard was considered, again, the longest in duration. It compared to other storms below 5,000 feet of elevation, and the equity issues and so forth. But and then peaked. The vehicles were stuck and power was lost, and finally they kind of worked their way out of this, even in spite of the limited resources. Okay, I'd like to hand the presentation now over to Professor Khan Osbey for the transportation section of the report.
Thank you. So I'll ask you to I'll say next, so this way we will
Yes, of course.
Yeah. All right. And again, some slides have too much information, so for the sake of time, I won't go through everything, but I'll just try to give an idea to the listeners to what's going on. So basically, one of the things that when we started working with Sarah Kaufman and Ray was really important is the transportation system, because the system really handles not only how people move, but how the emergency operations move. Even if you're going to fix the electricity network, you have to really use the road. So that was important. One of the things that we quickly heard and found out that people were in certain cases, they did not listen to the warnings of travel ban, or they either they didn't hear about the ban or they didn't listen to it, and they were stranded, and there were some of the deaths that Ray just mentioned happened because of that. So basically, we wanted to look at the transportation system as much as we could and try to understand what worked, what didn't work, and what can be done in the future in the recommendations section. Next, please. So again, there was a travel ban. So when the city heard about the storm, and they do this in many situations, there was a ban, and then what we wanted to understand how that ban worked out. So how many people were on this? Not how many, but which streets were used, which streets were not used, and what kind of different events happened on the transportation network. So there is no really official data that we could use. So we use some of the commercial data sources. Waze is one of them. Some of you might have Waze on your phones. So they make, they're a partner in this study, they make their data available. This data is by no means everything. This is basically what's reported to Waze. So these numbers are not 100% representative of what happened, but they are what Waze were able to get from people. So it's a crowdsourcing data. But the good thing about this, at least there is this data. So basically, if you look at the number of things that happened during that time period, it ranges from animal struck, collision, disabled vehicles, flood, and so on. So we have an idea of what happened. And some of these things is also an indication that people were on the roads. So if there's a disabled vehicle, it means somebody was driving. If there's a collision, it means at least one person, one car, because they might get they might have a collision with a pole, whatever, or 2-3 vehicles were involved. So basically, this data shows us that some people were on the roads and accidents happen. And then overall, we saw, for example, disabled vehicles of 87. Disabled vehicles are especially important because then people get stranded inside the vehicle and somebody has to go and rescue them, basically. I mean, they're not going to walk. Next, please. So this is, again, what I said. There was a continuing driving activities during the ban. This is not just rescue vehicles that are moving around because there's a minimum number of vehicles that have to be reported in order to have activity reported. So it's just more than that. But one thing that we observed, there are a lot of minor and major accidents. And especially the major accidents, if you look at the table on the right, during the blizzard dates were, I mean, higher than other similar periods before and after, 270 major accidents. And then the minor accidents were lower. But if you have kind of a guideline for this, is that the accidents happen in proportional to the number of vehicles on the roadways. So during that period of time, the fact that we have so many major accidents and a lot of minor accidents comparable to other periods without the storm that we show in this table is a good indication. And we know that during that period, there are not too many vehicles on the streets. There's a good indication that snowstorm had something to do with this increased number of accidents. So that's, again, something important, because when you have an accident, your car doesn't move, maybe you're injured, and then there's more travel needed for people to come and rescue you and so on. So these numbers are quite high. And then kind of we can say that people were on the roads, they were actually also encountering accidents and dangerous situations. Next, please. Next, please, Ray.
Oh, yeah. Huh.
Now moving.
Yeah, I don't know why it froze just suddenly. The screen just froze, and it's not.
Maybe.
Why don't you talk through the next one, and I'll see what's happening.
Let me just. I mean, the presentation is not open in front of me, so let me just open the presentation. Maybe you want to. Let me share the screen. So if you can, if they let me do it, you know.
Hey, Ray, can you click on stop share on your side?
Yeah.
It says pause share.
Yeah.
It's pausing. Oh, and then stop share.
Yeah,
okay,
just click that, and that should allow him or you to reboot here. So.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Should I reboot, Khan, or what?
No, because it says host disabled participant screen sharing, so I cannot share.
Okay.
So you maybe you want to go back and Because now something happened. Maybe you want to.
Well, I can go back
your
and
screen? Yeah. Oh, I'm the co-host. Okay, allowed me to do that. Okay, good. Share.
uh,
All right.
oh,
So can
so
you see my
you're
screen?
sharing.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah,
Yeah,
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm just moving to that slide. So this one again, a slide where we show the activities. So there's another data source called INRIX. INRIX allows you to see the travel speeds, and if there's no one on the roadway, it will show you as 0. But if there is some minimum number of people, it will generate the travel time for that road segment. They call it traffic message channels, TMCs. So again, this is a large data set, and we looked at that. In the beginning, just after the travel ban, there were a lot of segments with 0 travel time, meaning nobody was out there. And then after the 24th, that non-zero travel speeds gradually started increasing. That means people started going out until the driver ban was lifted. So again, this is another indication. This is not a direct measurement, so nobody is going and observing how many people are out there, but just we are inferring from what we see from the data set that there are enough people out there so that this service is able to generate travel times. So basically, in conclusion, there were warnings and alerts by the mayor's office, media, government, and so on, and asking people not to go out. But not everybody heard about this, obviously, or they were ignored. And then from the data, we could see that there were people out there traveling in spite of the dangerous conditions that were communicated to people. And some of them might be driving to go to a friend, or maybe to get some supplies, or some of them can be also returning from work. So again, we don't have direct observation, we don't have direct data, but we know that people were out there. We kind of looked at the documents and information, and we tried to understand what were the problems, basically. Okay, so this is not, again, direct observation by just this is looking at the information about the blizzard, extensive information, and what happened during the blizzard. So one thing that we saw that the report mentioned 41 plow trucks and 19 high lifts in Buffalo's Department of Public Works, and this looks like it was insufficient when it came to dealing with the size of this blizzard. Obviously, this is once in a lifetime type of blizzard. Probably they were not expecting this, but when we looked at the November 2022 storm, which is a storm just before the December storm, they required 500 small snow removal vehicles for 80 inches of snow. December, they also required similar numbers, even slightly more numbers, because it's a different kind of blizzard. But again, they didn't have enough of them in their inventory. The second is the Buffalo's streets are narrow, so some of these large snow removal equipment they were not able to get into the streets of Buffalo, open the streets. Again, that might have created some of the problems that they encountered. So there is information that they needed snow mobiles to go, or all-terrain vehicles to traverse the snow effectively and help the people, but they didn't have them. And one of the reasons that were communicated was that the state didn't feel that snowmobiles is an important investment. Of course, there's a pie, and you have to divide the pie in a way that helps different things with the city. So there was not enough investment in these kind of smaller vehicles in reach people in these locations. We also looked at the 311 data, which is this is like people call when they need to open the snow on their streets, or they need to be have free fallen and then remove the tree. And as expected, there were a lot of these reports. So if you look at the table, so during the blizzard, there's like a 3,400 snowplow requests, a lot of them. So that kind of makes the point that they needed many more than they had, even just based on these requests, but they didn't have them. And this is obviously the number is tremendously higher than the number they had for other periods. So that's important. The average time to close the 311 snowplow plow requests are in hours very high. Like here, 225 hours for the blizzard. In January, is like 63 hours. So this is like 4 times higher. For the fallen tree reports, again, there's a lot of the fallen trees, and then the time to remove the trees is again almost 3-4 times higher than regular time. So obviously the city was overwhelmed by all these requests because there's so many things happening, and then obviously compared to 35 hours to remove a tree versus 139 hours, this is a very long time. And that might have also had some impact on some of the inefficiencies. So based on the brief discussion, we can conclude that the city did not have enough resources to tackle the problems it faced during this major blizzard. And this is actually a similar story with some of these mega storms, not just snowstorms, but other kinds of storms that we have been seeing for the last 5-10 years. And then one of the things that we saw, so the city was unable to effectively open block roads due to accumulation of snow and fallen trees. And compared to normal conditions, there were delays. So the city is, I think, experienced in dealing with especially the snow events, but this was really something that's much higher, higher. So what we concluded, we said that there's a need for a more robust blizzard plan, given the change in climate, the change in the strength of these storms, and actually this one of our recommendations. So the analyzed data, so I'm showing you, suggests that the need for a better preparation, more resources to clear incidents in effective, efficient manner during these events. And one of the things that we found out is that the city of Buffalo, as Ray said, it's the second largest city in New York State, didn't have a traffic management center. And in fact, in many places, these traffic management centers, they operate every day of the year, but when there's a major event like this one, they become an emergency management center also. So like New Jersey, for example, has a traffic management center for the whole state, which also acts as an emergency management center. So we thought this would have been really useful if they had a management center like this. They also have to have a snow removal plan that deals with these extremes. They didn't have that. I think that would have been really useful. Okay. And then the other thing is that the information could have been communicated to drivers and to the public maybe a little bit more efficiently, because not everybody listens to radio or TV. So a better emergency communication plan and deployment plan might be good. In addition to personal devices, you can use intelligent transportation technologies such as dynamic message signs to advise people the conditions and maybe not to be on the road. But one other thing we thought useful is to have data-driven forecasting methods. They will tell people what to expect, not only what's out there, but what to expect, like how much accumulation, how much road problems to expect, and that can be a very useful tool. Then, I mean, the other thing that, again, we saw in the reports that we reviewed and I mentioned before, DPW can have better facilities, additional funding to coordinate operations such as snow removal, emergency response, and their overall functions might be quite useful. So, I mean, there are a lot of these bullet points that we mentioned. This is from what we read and from our interviews. It's clear that there's a need for a real new facility and maybe a new fleet of snow removal vehicles. As I mentioned, they have vehicles and then they can borrow vehicles from other places, but I think it would help having a new generation of vehicles and also vehicles that can easily go to smaller, narrower streets and then do the removals more efficiently. Historical data can also be employed to improve pre-event planning for extreme severe weather management. The resource prediction is important in this case. Again, in the beginning of the storm, you might not think that this is going to be needed more resources than you need, but if you have a better prediction model, and if you're going to run out of certain equipment, and you can predict that, that would be really useful. We've done a project like that for New Jersey Turnpike to predict their salt usage, for example, so that in the event of a very big storm, they know that they might need additional chemicals or additional equipment, and they can start early. So the time is everything here. The timing is very important. And the snow storm is not too long, few days, but if you're late in getting some of these resources, and if you don't use them in a timely manner, then the consequences can be really bad. Again, the other thing that we suggested, you can have a data-driven approach for decision making. That means at every step of the event, you can look at the data, historical, and then some of the models that can be developed, and then to manage the weather events, not with some predetermined plans, but based on what's going on and what is expected. So operations and maintenance of fleet activation and deactivation procedures should depend on the forecasted data, not the historical data, because as you see in this case, sometimes the historical data, historical plan doesn't tell you much. So what's going on is very different than what you see. So the forecasting might be really important. We suggest that you use crowdsourced data because you cannot have sensors on every road, so you're not going to be able to see what's happening, but people can report what's going on, and if you have a good way of do data fusion and incorporating all that data together, they can really have a better understanding of the situation. So situational awareness can be improved. One thing that we saw in the literature, other places they did, for example, they used the dashboard images from the snow plows because they're on the road. They are cleaning the streets. And if you have cameras that broadcast the street images, they can also be used to kind of tell people what's going on. And then that information can be communicated to not only to agency people, but also people who live in the area. And then we also recommend that Buffalo continues to its partnership with Niagara International Transportation Technology Coalition to find useful solutions and fund them over time. Finally, we also suggest that maybe not in the short term, but in the midterm, look at the automated systems for weather responsive traffic management and reduce safety risks during operations. I mean, one of the things is that when the storm is really bad, you don't want vehicles with people to go out and clean the streets on the roadways. But then you can have these automated autonomous vehicles that can navigate without a human driver, and then clean the streets and roadways. I think that might be really, really useful in minimizing safety risks during and after extreme events, and you don't put human lives at danger, in this case, the driver's lives. And then there might be a post-event evaluation using autonomous drones and pre-installed cameras. And so once the storm is over, again, you don't want to send people out quickly without knowing the situations, but you can use some of these autonomous vehicles and so on to get pictures and video of what's going on, and then maybe focus on areas that are really problematic. So these are all kind of a more midterm, long-term solutions, but I think the city has to look at those, understanding that some of these major extreme events might happen more frequently than before. So here I'm going to stop, and I'm going to stop
Okay.
sharing, and I'm going to let
Yeah, let me see if I can resume my sharing. And if not, Con, I may have to have you
yes.
come back. Okay. So you stopped sharing.
Yeah, I stopped sharing. So click on share.
Other screen sharing. Yeah. So it says, okay. And then, okay. Now I have mine up,
All right.
but it doesn't,
And then you go to the right just to make it
yeah,
full screen.
it doesn't have that little icon.
On the bottom, I can see it, Jay. Like,
Oh, on the bottom. Oh, yes. Now there it is. Okay, hold on a minute. Yes. Usually it's at the top.
yes.
Okay, good. And now we're back to where I froze. All right. And I'll be okay. Now I'll be reviewing the electric power portion of the report. The interesting thing is electric power, we think of the city of Buffalo as primarily in terms of National Grid, which is true. It's a big company, provides electric power services not only to the city of Buffalo, but to the county, New York State, and even internationally. But there is gas, which is supplied separately by the National Fuel Gas Supply Corporation, but apparently a lot of their infrastructure was underground, so they didn't really have to do much. Getting to the heart of the matter, 20,000 people were without power at the peak. And what's interesting, and I'll show this, is that Buffalo's outages exceeded those in the county. The utility faced severe access and mobility issues. Its interdependency with transportation was really highlighted here because they couldn't get anywhere without the streets being cleared. The transmission and distribution systems were primarily affected rather than bulk power, but they had very unusual outages at the substation level. Okay, just, we need to understand a little bit about the electric power infrastructure, substations, transmission, distribution, in order to understand the vulnerability, because that's what happens. They've got 8 big transmission lines over 20 miles, but 470 distribution lines over 890 miles. And they have sub-transmission, distribution, all sorts of other things. And interestingly, the fourth bullet, there are about 82,500 service points to overhead and underground customer systems. And substations, they have 52 and others. And there is a substation distribution interconnectivity at the underground level. This is a very interesting map of the city of Buffalo. It's a heat map. It shows where the demand for electric power is, and it's out of the NYPA report, New York Power Authority report, back in 2015. I'll come back to that and its significance. The sources of electricity are quite unique. They don't produce their own bulk power, the National Grid. It comes from NYSO, NYPA, and small producers. But National Grid is the main energy provider, having about 121,000 customers. Now, customers aren't people; they're where the service comes in, and commercial customers are really the big users, and this is in gigawatt hours. What happened, the damage to the infrastructure due to resource accessibility and other reasons, is that 3 substations froze due to inundation by snow and freezing temperatures in very unexpected ways. In the report, we described that actually by design, the substations were designed with one of the four faces open to allow cooling, but they fenced it in, to make sure animals and intruders didn't get in. But that's where the snow came in and froze the system in that fourth face, and they never expected that to happen. Transmission and distribution damage. The thing is that replacement supplies were very limited because there was a large area of demand and supply chain issues. Now, Buffalo is part of the mutual assistance agreements that span the entire country, but limited due to the competition from other areas. Other areas needed their help at the same time. This is a view of the substation freezing that I mentioned. The snow just came right in to the fourth face, and it was very difficult to get it out. They, to their credit, though, National Grid they did rely on a number of small generators and things to try to melt the snow. Now, this is a graph I did where this shows the red line is what was Erie County's outages over time. Blue is the city of Buffalo, and it shows very clearly that the number of outages in Buffalo far exceeded those in the county, and then the peak period around December 24th for both of them, and then on either side things go down. This is the map again, the heat map, and what I did here was to look at the outages mapped against the demand. And what you see is that the demand of the heat maps, the red areas where electric power is used the most, didn't always coincide with the location of the outages at all, which is kind of a scary thing. And also one thing you have to understand, the areas of dark red were primarily underground systems. And now here's an equity issue. Here again, the map in the red circles where the outages occurred, and on the left-hand side, you see household income by census tract. And here again, with the darker colors signifying higher income areas and lighter, lower. And interestingly, you see that the outages were greater in the lower income areas. The second map shows the most populous race in each area, and the purple are Black and African American, and you see that a lot of the outages were in that location. And in the green, the light green is white. There were outages there too, but the large purple areas where signifying Black populations had very large outages, and that's sort of graphically helped us build the equity case. Now, how does National Grid and others, how do they respond to electric power outages? Well, they go by a set of guidelines. Who do we bring back first? And these are critical facilities, levels 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And basically, your emergency services, your infrastructure, fuel, water, fire, get the high transit, airports get the highest priority. Level 2 is health and government functions. Level 3 is housing. So there is a very clear hierarchy, for better or for worse, who gets dealt with first. So just switching now to the end of the presentation, just to summarize all across the different sectors, as Khan mentioned, in transportation, very important for people to understand not to drive in storms like this. This is not only true of this blizzard, but it's also true. It's all very much true of floods, any sort of thing that human behavior is such that people tend to think of their cars as rescue vehicles. And then secondarily, to improve the public works facilities, certainly for snow removal and emergencies, to have a data-driven approach to decision-making, for traffic management, and then use automated systems to improve the cost effectiveness of weather response, whether they're monitors or whatever. And then business continuity, which we weren't able to go through in great detail, but employers have to know what to do in a disaster. There should be clear definitions, and third, create an information line for employers and really try to provide support for businesses and organizations to create their own emergency planning. And then again, what I've mentioned for electric power, one thing I didn't emphasize enough is the fact that there's a tremendous amount of interconnectivity between electric power and everything else. You can't get water, you can't run your traffic signals, your traffic lights without electric power, communications, and everything else. And we've got to make this recognized upfront in order to address how to design effective electric power. There's also a lot of interdependency between, I didn't get a chance to go through this, but fuel as well. You have to have that on tap to run all of the critical infrastructures and the electric power. A second is to basically, you've got to run through the entire sequence of planning, design, operations, and maintenance, and all the other functions of the city. And then third, there is a need to work with National Grid to innovatively distribute power. When the power goes out, there are a lot of other things you can do. You can have distributed energy. You can unplug the system. You can raise the system. Con Ed has here in New York City, has a very large contingency plan for that purpose. And you just have to avoid a lot of these cascading events. Now, communications, we didn't do that much with, but you have to have, that has to go hand in hand with emergency management, doing it early, frequently, changing the messages over time as needed. And the messages have to really be tailored to who you're trying to communicate with. The demography, their concerns, and trust is always a big need. And all of the levels of government need to participate in the communication system. It's not enough for the city to be communicating with its own people, but the county and the state are needed as well. And the vulnerable residents have to be major stakeholders here because there has to be ways of reaching them. And Again, emergency response transparency. We have to have ways to reach out and get the connectivity. There's something called Buffalo, and that should be increased, and consider other notification systems. There has to be an active participation system. It's not just that you start participating at the end of a system, but you need to be doing it. All along. And then equity has been a thread that's through the entire presentation. But there are specific things you can do. You can have storm boxes with emergency supplies. You can have ways of providing people who really don't have the resources themselves to provide these things. And then prioritize restoring public transportation after a storm, because that's the only way people in poverty, minorities, disabled are able to get around. Especially linkages to grocery stores and food pantries. This is a key thing. And then the warming shelters, especially in the blizzard. But if you can't get to them and they're not operating because of power outages, but you can't get to them because the streets need to be plowed, that is definitely a problem. And you have to have an emergency plan for each of these shelters. So how do we move forward? The city is actually reviewing its city-based emergency management organization to strengthen response. This has got to be a priority here, especially a city like Baltimore, but like Buffalo, which has been so beaten down by lake effect snow and all sorts of other weather conditions. They've got to have an ongoing and continuous emergency planning function. And then the assets are critical. I think Con mentioned we didn't have enough of these snow blowers and things to go around, and lifts, heavy lifts. We not only have to upgrade the stock in terms of the numbers, but we also have to upgrade them in terms of the system that manages them. How do we get them going in a snowstorm? I know there was one study that I had analyzed, the New York City MTA. Half the time the workers were in one place, the drivers were in one place, and their vehicles were another place, and you couldn't get them together because the streets weren't clear enough for that. And so there's got to be an operations plan for assets, as well as inventories, sufficient inventories. And again, we need, the heart of the matter is public communications, and then as usual, the resources to address equity issues. So I think, Con, unless you have something further to add, I think we're good here.
I think we're good. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Whoops. Yeah. So, Charles, I think if you want to open up, yeah.
Sure. Well, thank you, Ray and Con, for that. Obviously, a lot of depth and a lot more, obviously, in the written document. I believe there's a link to that report in the event notification. But if anybody needs it, they can send me an email.
Yeah.
And actually, if one of you wanted to post a link to that, that would be great also in the chat. But so the first question, and I think this is an interesting, I don't know if these aren't really in order, but I'm struck by the weather forecast. The National Weather Service was active, and they were able to put out a warning of this weather storm in advance.
Yes.
And there was considerable discussion in the press about, and obviously in retrospect, the answer is they didn't do enough, but was there enough done in terms of warning the public and putting government on a footing, for example, calling in staff, early to operate plows, or doing things to, pre-position supplies. I know some of that was done, but I'm just struck by, here in New York City, we just went through this with the rainstorm, and people tried to point back at the Weather Service and said, well, we weren't adequately warned. And the Weather Service said, yeah, no, it was there. We knew the flow, the amount of rainfall was going to be sufficient to cause these kinds of problems, yet we didn't seem to get ahead of it. And, from your experience with this study and kind of reflecting, on the field generally, what do you think the impediments or the challenges are in terms of translating weather forecasts into kind of concrete actions for governments in terms of preparation?
I think first of all, there's the timing. I believe that the forecasts and the warnings came a day earlier. And is that really enough time? And then secondarily, what are the channels through which the forecast? It may have gone to the city's whatever mayor's office, or it has to be available very widely across all of these services that are responsible for reacting and responding to and helping people. And especially, there's got to be a way to convincingly communicate these predictions to the drivers, to the people in their houses. And why is it that they don't believe the forecasts? And do they feel that they want to get out before it happens? Do they feel, oh, we've heard this before? Oh, we don't believe the Weather Service? What? We've got to get at the a firmer understanding of the risk communication system here.
I think just to follow up what Ray said, I've done a lot of work on hurricane evacuations, and this is one of the recurring issues with hurricane evacuations, because although the state clearly orders hurricane evacuations, there are always people who don't listen to those orders and they don't evacuate. So we work with very experienced officers, and when they know it's really a big hurricane and it's going to create a lot of problems, they would go door to door and give people what they call dog tags to put on their on them. And the reason for that, they say, look, if you don't evacuate, you'll be killed most probably, and we want to know who you are. So it's like a scare tactic, and people don't listen. You see on TV, I mean, people watching a storm coming, and so on. So there's a human aspect to it. On the other hand, I think for the timing of this storm, on the agency side and on the equipment and preparation, it's just before Christmas. So that's also kind of, probably some people were on vacation and so on. So that timing has I think had a negative impact on, because it's the holiday season, so people are not maybe 100% staffed and so on. So that's something that needs to be studied further, I think. Right, that's all I have to say.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead. No. So, yeah, I think there's and obviously on the equity issue, I don't know if people had seen the Gannett newspapers did a pretty lengthy report looking at some of the individuals who were killed in the storm, and on equity, some of these decisions, employers need to be in the loop, and they have a lot of large institutional employers up in the Buffalo area, right? To say, we're not, don't come to work. We're going to give you leave, or we're going to order you in early, and we're going to make arrangements to shelter you, in the event that something happens. Because a lot of people work in healthcare and things like that. And of course, some of the people going out for food in the middle of the storm, we often, assume, right, this kind of suburban, semi-affluent, mindset of, well, we've got a freezer full of stuff, and we can just basically, if we had to stay in our house for a week, we could probably do that with minimal impact. There's a lot of people, obviously, who don't have resources, don't have food available, and so they ran out. And so, in some cases it was convenience, but in many cases it was a necessity, and trying to communicate with them. So on that note, did you get any information on the kind of the emergency response in terms of how the city and the 911 system dealt with people who were stranded in vehicles, who were, calling for help over periods of hours? Did you get any information on that element of the response?
Yeah, Con, I think it was some of your tables showed the 311.
Yeah, I mean, the response times were obviously much longer than usual, but from from what we attended, I mean, the interviews and what we read, I think they did their best, but they didn't have enough resources, and it was widespread. And that's what we said. Maybe the normal operational procedures might not be enough. So you might have like a special blizzard type of planning and response plan, which we recommend that they should look into that. But I think they did their best. At some point, even the rescue people couldn't go out because the visibility is so low and the roads are blocked. So you have to take all that into consideration. So what we're saying is, what is the alternative plan if something like that to happen again, beyond your regular operational procedures? Can you plan for that? I mean, again, we don't have an answer, but we ask them to take a look into that.
Mhm.
Hey, Charles, I got a question for the panelists here. Ray, you mentioned earlier, you showed the outage maps in your presentation. What's, of course, what, I don't know if you looked at this or not, but you can imagine that the older portions of the system are in the older portions of the city of Buffalo, which usually corresponds to the the income levels being probably at the lowest in those particular areas. They're the oldest homes, or the oldest of everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And what was interesting to me is that you also pointed out, this is something I've been thinking about for a while, you also pointed out the fact of the gas system, which of course is, for the most part, completely underground. Was greatly unaffected by, of course, this blizzard, which brings up this interesting kind of question, or maybe comment from me about, there is a big push, of course, to get rid of fossil fuels. And we're trying to push electric, but we're pushing electric into a system that perhaps in situations like this doesn't function 100% of the time. And I just know anecdotally from my own experience that natural gas continues to flow during these kinds of emergencies, and people are pretty inventive of the way they use it to keep things warm. For example, we know in the city that when the power goes off or the boilers shut down, people use their gas stoves to heat their apartments. And similar kind of things happen in single family homes as well. So it is complicated. And I just wanted to perhaps bring that up and see what your thoughts are about, redundancy, types of energy, basically, particularly in this kind of environment in Northeast, where we do have snowstorms quite a bit and temperatures dip below zero from time to time. What your thoughts on that are?
Well, certainly we definitely need the alternatives, and we need safe alternatives. Turning on the gas may not be terribly safe, but you know, they need to do that. They need renewable energy that's reliable, and that depends on adequate storage. When the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining, you know, our distributed energy systems won't function unless you've stored the energy. But that's a mega issue, and one that requires a lot of investment, and that they're moving forward on it. But we need to get that much, pay much more attention to that.
Sure.
And yeah, in terms of that's electric power and heating and stuff like that, but transportation is another whole thing. You know, the blizzard notwithstanding, you know, that's you need bikes, but not disabled people can't use bikes. So you've got to have different systems to move around.
And that was one of the issues, particularly with transportation, that came up in the snowstorm several years ago in New York City. The city did not do a good job pairing, for example, ambulances with plows, right? So you get an ambulance call for help, and they can't get there, right? They park on a main street and try to drag a stretcher, you know, quite a distance through deep snow, basically, get to somebody's house. And
yeah,
you know, the sort of coordination issue between agencies, right? That's important as well. Not just
it used to be that subway trains had, or rail would have plows attached to the front of the trains. I don't know if that's true anymore. You know, so you're right. There's become a segmentation of functions, and it's not helping.
Right. Charles?
Yeah, I was just, did you have any insights? I know this is an interesting disaster because it's been studied from a different perspectives. One, you know, the county did a report, the city did a report, and the state, I think, did it. Well, I don't know if the county didn't do a report, but the county released, you know, some documentation, and the state did a report. But did you uncover, or do you have any thoughts on the relationship between the city of Buffalo and Erie County? Because I know there was tension during the event, and at one point there was kind of some accusatory messaging going back and forth between the county and the city. You know, and that obviously not a seamless relationship between the two government entities. But any thoughts on how that dynamic played out?
There's got to be almost like a mutual assistance agreement. You have to have the county and the city sharing resources, but they all own their own. They compete for resources and funding. And the only way to, I think, approach it is to have maybe the state step in and be able to encourage those kinds of alliances. Because otherwise you're going to have redundant resources. You're going to have stagnant resources. One needs one, the other has it but doesn't need it. And so that kind of operational coordination is very, very important.
Okay. We'll take questions via chat for anyone who has them. We did put a link to the report in chat, so if anybody was looking for that, that's there. Let's see.
Well, I got a question for Con here. I guess you folks have done work with the Jersey Turnpike, and sort of helping them make a variety of decisions about predicting the need for salt and, you know, resources of this kind or that kind. I guess the challenge what you had here is that, you know, the turnpike, the thruway, those are all one line highways basically. You know, when you get into a situation like Buffalo, you're dealing with lots of secondary streets, which can become just as dangerous as the primaries, right? And actually probably are more dangerous because those are the ones that usually get plowed the last. So, you know, what contrast perhaps, Con, your thoughts about, again, since you did work with the turnpike, versus, you know, a city grid environment like this. What's similar, but what's different?
I think a lot of similarities, although, I mean, turnpike sounds easier, but they have been working on it for a long time. So so what we've done for them was to predict the salt usage levels for different winter conditions. But so they're not waiting for an event to happen. Because they are, it's a different kind of organization, and they're very determined about keeping their facility on open all the time. I think and the cities, obviously you cannot expect all the city streets to be plowed all the time, maybe for Buffalo, but the major ones can be done, and it's not a more difficult question. I think the question is about funding. If you find out that you need 500 snow plows for a storm that happens every 10 years, you might not be able to find the funding. From a planning perspective, from a prediction perspective, the problem is not more complicated. I think the more complicated part is funding part, because the funding might be obviously a very large amount. Turnpikes or the throughway, they have different toll road facilities, so they, in terms of funding, they have more funds, and obviously that works to their advantage. But in terms of prediction and planning and so on, it's a little bit more complicated, but not too much more. The other thing, I guess, it's in the report. It's not enough to have the equipment. You need to have people to run that equipment, experienced people, trained people. So my experience when I work with the Turnpike, they know their facility very well. Everything doesn't come within the Turnpike, so it's outside the Turnpike. The equipment, they move the salt, so they know what they're going to do very well. Their people are very well trained for snowstorms and so on, and they always have people to run these equipment. So that's why we said for a city like Buffalo, you might not have people, or it might be more dangerous. So maybe you can look at this new emerging technologies like autonomous vehicles, for example, that some other states, some other cities have been experimenting with. So I think, in a sense, they just start the conversation, they just start to look for funding, and then find the best solution for their own conditions. But it's not a problem without a solution. There is a solution, but I think the bottom line is money.
Right, and maybe as you pointed out earlier, contracting out additional resources, this sort of low frequency, high consequence type events like these, where you reach out much further away and basically pay the bill up front to have those resources available when they're needed. Of course, as you know, a lot of emergency management agencies do that for things that aren't typically needed, like cranes and things like that. So 500 snow plows, you're right.
You're not gonna, yeah, they need to plan for it. That's what our point was, you cannot do it like when the storm is going to happen tomorrow. There's a need for a long-term planning and again, decision making. That's the key.
And not only, part of that decision making has to permeate these mutual assistance agreements. It shouldn't be that whoever can grab faster gets the resources. There should be some way of distributing them equitably, especially when you have a very broad-based geographic disaster. Then everybody's calling on different resources, utilities, assets to get the to respond to their situation. Nobody is sitting on top of the mutual aid agreements at all that I'm aware of. It's just whoever calls first and stronger or whatever. That's what happens all over the country. Whenever there's a big power outage, the utilities come from all over the country to meet the need. But then what if there's an outage all over the place? Who gets served first? And then you get into equity issues.
On the transportation side, this interagency coordination is a big challenge. I mean, it's been a challenge since my PhD days because I was working on incident management. When there's an accident on the Beltway in Washington D.C., there are many. I mean, Maryland, Virginia, Washington D.C. They're all involved. And how do they coordinate, especially if it's something major? It's been a big challenge. It's not that easy. And then you have agencies within each state, each city. So I mean, I don't think there's a good answer. It's all about planning and training. Because I mean, when you have a big event, then everything falls apart if you are not ready for it. So it's been something that requires more attention. And beyond agreements, agreements are good, but how do you execute the agreements is another issue.
Excellent points. I'm thinking, going back a little ways in the discussion, you talked about kind of stepping out of the kind of normal operations. And I think there's an interesting analogy for those of you who follow our discussions on high-rise building safety in the UK as well as in New York City. In many places, the prevailing policy is that you do not evacuate residential high-rise buildings unless you're directly and immediately threatened. But at some point, as we saw with Grenfell Tower, the underlying conditions were such that guidance no longer made sense. And then when do you switch to say, okay, this is a unusual circumstance, disregard what we normally do, and we're going to do something totally different in response. And so I'm thinking of in the Buffalo, in terms of the recognition, when you have such a large number of people who are trapped and stranded in their vehicles, it seems that the system never pivoted from their kind of normal mode, which was people call every couple of hours and, yeah, we've got you on a list, we're on the way. And that was it. And people ended up, either running out of fuel and freezing or dying from carbon monoxide. And in some cases, they were, not very far from occupied buildings where people were hunkered down and were unaware that people were in peril, very close. And so, maybe that speaks to the idea of developing or using, I know the geolocation on 911 systems to say, use those coordinates and say, you can't stay in your car. You've got to go out. We're going to try to send someone, or we're going to try to steer you in the direction of getting somewhere. Now, obviously it's risky and a difficult decision to make, but it certainly speaks to the need in this kind of these, the likelihood of more and more extreme weather events, that the traditional guidance isn't always going to be appropriate. If the system is really overwhelmed, people are going to have to kind of help themselves and be empowered and given the resources to do that, or leverage neighbors and other resources that are out there.
Exactly, but I mean that takes experienced leadership with really some power, to make those decisions. Because obviously, if somebody sends someone out to save someone and that person dies, the rescue person, I mean, people don't want to take that responsibility also. So there's a lot of pre-planning, preparation, and so on needed, so that when a person makes that decision, he has enough experience to make that decision and that call, and also has the power to do it. Because sometimes they don't.
Yeah. Yes, no, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of liability and concerns here, and I'm sure I can put myself in the situation with looking at the corner of the table with the city's corporation counsel's office scowling, over this whole thing. But all right, well, I think do we have any other? Oh yeah, we do have something in chat. So let's see. Okay. Well, this is a question about why they couldn't get more snow plows. Now, I assume in Buffalo that they're contracting with private providers as well as the city owned. But I guess the question is, why didn't they get, weren't they more aggressive in finding additional snow plows ahead of the storm?
I don't have an answer for that, but as I said, it's not just a question of equipment. You need to have drivers, you need to have staging areas. So it's more complicated than just, I mean, it's not like having another box of food, So this is, I mean, you need to have the operational procedures, you need to provide them with fuel. So I mean, just having more is not that easy, having more snow plows. So I mean,
And I think
whoever is going to drive it, for example, need to know where it's driving. Like what is the path. I mean, it's just not just having the equipment is not the only problem. There are many other things.
And it's
Right.
it's also possible that like the city won't want to overstock all of this equipment for a storm that may come very infrequently. That's why you have mutual assistance agreements. So you distribute far more broadly the stock of equipment and that you can pull from it when you need it. I mean, any given locality it's going to be very difficult to overstock all this stuff. So you have to have a different distribution system.
Okay. Yeah, and I noticed you said the Buffalo, the municipal plows did have GPS data, right? So that was going back somewhere, and I'm just thinking ahead, like, well, maybe they need to put that in on their bids that if you're in the private plow that you're equipped with that, and their data could be reported up so they could track you. But yeah, absolutely. In an event like this, the just for the audience, they have to, basically you have to feed, you have to have shelter, you have to have places for breaks. Equipment breaks down in the middle of these things. You've got to plan for all those in order to keep those functional and to make sure that the workforce that's plowing the snow doesn't become a victim or incapacitated themselves. So
Exactly.
yeah,
And
that can be a big.
I mean, most of the time, these are people I know from New Jersey. Somebody who has a large SUV or truck, and then he will have a plow that he will mount or she will mount in front of his truck, and then do it in his own in his neighborhood, for example. Okay, so but I mean, so it's not just like always professionals, people who have a company, but then you put these regular people in danger. So if the snowstorm is that bad, so I mean, it's just not very straightforward.
Right, and we have the whole complication of abandoned vehicles, which makes the whole thing, a nightmare. That's a whole other layer of then getting, either tow trucks or some other equipment that's going to move those vehicles out of the way, and are you going to push them out of the way with heavy equipment, and is that going to then who's going to cover the damage, and blah 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 blah, and on it goes. So
but I think quick decision making is the key, so I think that for that you need to have decision making tools, you need to use the data, you need to use new methods. You cannot just have everything ready so that plan for, so some of it can be done on the fly and should be done on the fly. It cannot be just
right.
Pre-planned.
No, absolutely. And I'm reminded that the campfire, what was it, 2018 or whatever, out in California, in Paradise, one of the responding fire trucks, the road was blocked with abandoned vehicles, and they made the decision, that company officer, to ram the vehicles off the road to get the road open. And clearly that was not in any training course that anybody had. And obviously that was the right decision to make, but you can imagine how the paralysis would set in if those kinds of decisions hadn't been made. Okay, I think we have Sally Reaganhard wanted to make a comment.
I think we're done.
Sally? Okay.
In the chat.
Let's see.
Okay,
All right.
I'm unmuted myself. Okay.
Okay.
Hi. So I'd like to thank Con and Ray for this wonderful, timely, and so important presentation that can generally apply to all areas. I know we specified we were focusing on Buffalo today, but I wanted to just address the comments about why do people go out under these terrible circumstances when the weather has been talking about a blizzard or excessive rain or flooding. And I can tell you the answer to that. People do what they want to do. And the only thing that stops people from doing crazy or lawless things is when there is a consequence, when they are fined, when they could be subject to arrest. And I really feel it really came to my attention very much recently when we had that heavy rain and flooding in the New York metropolitan area, certainly in Westchester County and the New York metropolitan area. And I must tell you that every time we have a heavy rain and flooding situation, the Bronx River Parkway gets flooded. This is just a constant thing. People go out, they just disregard any kind of cautions, and then the fire department and the police department have to come and rescue these people. And these emergency services are needed for people who get heart attacks, for fires and so on. I really believe that cities like New York City should institute some type of punitive action that people who don't have a valid reason to act during this type of emergency situation, and if they break down and they have to be rescued, I think they should be fined.
I think they were fined. So they were very, actually, there's thousands of dollars of traffic fines. They fine people. Yeah.
And wealthier people can pay the fines, but poor people can't.
I have to tell you, I'm born and raised in New York, and I still live here in the city. And I have never heard anybody receiving a fine for taking their car out in
Buffalo, in Buffalo, they were fined, but I think
Buffalo, yeah.
Buffalo, they were fined. I mean,
okay, that's
the state. I mean, the city tried to fine them, gave them, big amounts, like thousands of dollars. I heard. I don't have numbers.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with exactly what happened in Buffalo, but I'm saying, as a general principle, I think there has to be a consequence to these people who go out. I'm not talking about Buffalo. I'm not that familiar with it, but certainly here in New York City, people who go out when they're warned that there's going to be flooding, the parkways are going to be flooded, and so on. So that's just a thought that I have. But
yeah, and even beyond this punitive thing, there's a fundamental psychological factor driving people's behavior. People like to be in control, and they feel they are in control when they're using their own vehicle. It's one of the reasons people use cars instead of planes. And even though the accident rate is much higher, we've got to overcome this need for personal control that is dominating them jumping into a car whenever anything happens.
I really think legal consequences, fining, that's the only thing that will stop people. I was thinking recently, your car, people have to renew their inspection. Why? Because if they don't do it, there's consequences. People have to have a license, because if you don't have it, there's consequences. And I really feel that when there are consequences, it will somewhat affect a certain amount of people who are afraid to receive a fine and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking about New York City area.
Yeah. Well, I think, Sally, the other dimension, I think, is it psychologically, and Ray, you can amplify it or clarify. it goes toward reinforcing the idea that the government is serious, and this is a real threat. This isn't just the press hyping up the weather forecast. This is a real serious situation, and there it could be harmful and dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Just-
apologize. I have to jump off because I have another meeting.
Yeah.
But thank you for listening to us.
Yes, well, we're right at 3:00, and so I want to thank both of you, Ray and Con. There's a lot of material there. I did send out the link, and I appreciate you spending time with us today to talk about that. And I think this has been interesting because it really, I think, as Sally and others have grasped, this really does kind of transcend the particular snowstorm and has a lot of lessons for managing unusual events generally, and it certainly resonates kind of in the mainstream of emergency management and incident management. So thank you very much for that, and
Thank
we
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting us. Yes.
And thank
Okay,
you.
well, thank you. Yep. And if you're online, everybody will get a link to the talk once it's edited. That will probably be in about a week. And so you will be getting that in your email. So thank you all for your attendance, and we'll see you next month.